Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here at the Mini Analytics Sports Conference. I will be speaking today on, as she mentioned, perception versus reality, what drives fan experience at sporting events. For those of you who may be unaware, I work at Navigate Research. We are a market research and analytics agency based out of Chicago. We're about 20 to 25 people, and our focus is really sports sponsorship. So for primary market research, that's a lot of sponsorship impact research. Are sponsorships effective? Are people noticing it? What type of benefits are those providing to the brands that sponsor the league or team or whatever it is? And then on more analytics side, our focus is really sponsorship valuation. So what's the fair market value of a naming rights deal for a stadium or a jersey sponsorship in the MLS or something like that? But in addition to those areas, we also do some syndicated research, and that's what I'll be talking to you about today is a syndicated study we conducted last year in partnership with Wasserman. So a quick agenda of what I'll be talking about today. First, the case for change, so why we did this study, what we set out to address, and why we thought now was the right time to look into the fan experience. I'll share some of the key findings from the study across various leagues, teams, different demographic groups to get you a little insight into what we found. I'll do a case study for one of the most iconic venues in sports, Fenway Park, just to give you an idea of when we share these results with a client, a team, or a venue, how they might use this study to inform their strategy and really improve their fan experience. And then finally, give you a quick look at what were some of the top performing teams and venues that we found, and time for any questions at the end. So historically, the live fan experience is extremely powerful for building fans of a team. I think those of us that work in sports can sometimes lose perspective on this, the power that attending live sports has over fans. I think back to my own childhood and living near Philadelphia. My dad brought us to see the Sixers when Michael Jordan came to town, and he dropped 42 on the Sixers, and I mean, I can remember it to this day. I think I was 7 years old, but it's a big reason why I'm a big NBA fan today. And that's how sport fanhood is passed through generations. That's how becoming a sports fan really becomes ingrained in people, is the power of that live experience. And that shows here in this quote from one of our respondents. She's an NFL fan, and she was literally brought to tears with the power of attending an NFL game or NHL game. But it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. You see that she used the word bucket list, as one of her bucket list things, and that's sort of by definition a rare occasion. It's a luxury. It's something that she's maybe unlikely to return and come back to often, and that sort of looks ahead to some of what we found in this study. The cost of attending games, it is a rarity. It's something that's not always everyone can afford to go to every game or be a season ticket holder. And so you really want to ensure that when fans are attending a game, they are having the best possible experience. So they're more likely to remember it positively. They're more likely to make that investment of time and energy and money to come back again. So as we looked into fan experience, beyond sort of this more qualitative reason, we found two ongoing trends in the sports industry that also made us want to look into this. The first on the left-hand side of the screen, I don't think would be a surprise to anyone, these cultural and technology shifts. Younger fans, and I count myself among this group, often prefer to stay home and watch the game at home for a variety of reasons. The view's better on your screen, it's much easier, there's conflicts in your life that maybe it's tough to get to the stadium. Some people just simply prefer to stay home. 91% of younger fans stated they go to bed with their devices. So we're tied to these devices that we have, and we can get that social element of watching a sports game through Twitter or other sources while sitting on your couch and watching at home, and maybe that need to attend isn't as strong as it may have been in past generations. But it's not only the younger fans or maybe the fans that don't have the money to attend that are staying home. NFL fan, saying it's tough to spend that much money to go to a game for something I can basically do for free. And this is an affluent fan. And so it cuts across age, it cuts across income group of, people are just wanting to stay home. So then on the right-hand side of the slide, looking at more of the macro level, we took a look at U.S. sports gate receipts over the past 5 years and saw that growth, 2.6%, just barely outpacing inflation in gate receipts for U.S. sports. And even more troubling is the composition of that growth. It's entirely driven by the price and the mix of the assets or the tickets being sold. So that's more premium seating, more luxury suites, things that maybe the average fan can't necessarily afford. And that's what's driving this increased revenue, while attendance remains flat or even slightly negative. So that's not a sustainable model long term if you're wanting to maintain a robust attendance and a strong fan base. So kind of looking at these overall trends, we thought it's an important time for teams to maybe they could use some more tools or more insights to inform what can we do to attract fans, what can we do to make sure our fans are having a good experience so they're more likely to return. So what we did was we surveyed over 8,500 fans across over 100 teams and venues in 20 markets across the country. And then we supplemented that with some in-depth interviews to add some color and insight to some of the findings that we had from the survey results. And we really had 3 goals in doing this. So the first was to understand fan priorities, get a feel of perception versus reality in what drives a good experience when a fan goes to a game. We also wanted to create benchmarks for teams and venues so they could understand, as we share these results with them, where do they stack up against the rest of the teams in their league, or where do they stack up against the other teams in their market, not only in overall fan experience, but in 18 different factors that we tracked in fan experience in. So things like views or food and beverage quality or parking or ticket cost or any of these factors, where do they stack up in all of them so they can see what's the areas that, if they change, are most likely to move the needle with fan experience. And finally, with these 2 first goals, the ultimate goal is so that this can inform the strategy of teams, that they can make investment decisions, they can make strategic decisions on improving their venue, improving their fan experience so that fans go home happy. So in doing this study, we started with the big overall question of what is really important to fans. And we wanted to look at this from 2 sides. We wanted to look at their stated importance, what do they perceive, or what do I perceive as a fan is important to my experience, just sort of consciously thinking about it, what's my experience. And then we also wanted to look at maybe what are the actual drivers that correlate with a positive or a negative fan experience. So we did that kind of with 2 layers. The first is stated importance. So what I mentioned earlier is we had 18 factors that we asked about, and it's just simply asking all the respondents, rate the importance of this factor, of view, for example. How important is that as it relates to your experience as a fan at a sporting event? So if I think it's pretty important, I might rate, I think view is an 8 out of 10 for importance of my fan experience when I go to a sporting event. But then to get to that more, that actual importance, what we're calling it, what we did for all of these fans is we asked them for each sporting event or venue that they attended within the last year, how was that factor? So, when you went to the Twins game last summer, how was your view? And we asked those same 18 factors. Maybe I had a slightly obstructed view. My view was a 6 out of 10. And then after asking about those 18 factors, we simply asked, okay, now rate your overall fan experience. How was that time for you? Did you enjoy it? From poor to excellent. And if I had a really good time, maybe I'd say, overall that was a 9 out of 10. And so in taking this data on the actual side, we can start to see which of these factors correlate strongly with having either a positive or a negative fan experience. So if we see a lot of people rating view as excellent, they had a great view at the game, but then their actual fan experiences, the overall fan rating at the bottom is all over the board, maybe that doesn't really correlate strongly with view. But if we see when people say they have a poor view, they're consistently saying that they had a poor fan experience, and when they say they had a strong view, they're consistently saying they had a strong fan experience. Of course, that's a strong correlation, and we can start to infer that maybe view is an important factor in fan experience. And so throughout the report, we wanted to compare what is this perceived or stated conscious importance of fan experience versus what's actually important based on my own responses of the own teams and venues that I attended in the last year. So here are some of the high-level results of what we saw as far as rankings of some of these factors. And we divided on the left 9 venue factors, so factors maybe that the venue has more control over, and on the right, team factors that the team might have more control over. And you start to see some interesting stories. So, first here on the left with venue, food and drink quality and scoreboard. As far as stated importance, these rank pretty low. People are saying, I don't think that's that important to my fan experience when I attend a sporting event. But when we look at what correlates most strongly with fan experience, we see that food and drink quality and scoreboard are actually the 2 highest ranking factors. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect there. Conversely, at the bottom of this table for venue factors, we see ease of getting to the venue and parking rated very highly as far as stated importance, things that people say are important for them to attend when they attend a game. But when we looked at actual correlation to the fan experience that they had, they were the 2 lowest ranking factors for fan experience. And so that might be they're considering those things as almost a sunk cost at that point. When looking back on the event, they almost forget those pain points, or those aren't as important to them if they had a really positive experience in other ways. And so if I'm working at a venue and I'm looking at these results, I might start to think that these are almost comforting in a way, the way they turned out, because you think about parking and ease of getting to the venue, those things are really difficult for you to change. You're not going to pick up and move the location of your arena. But food and drink quality, scoreboard, these are things that with an investment I can change, and we found correlate very strongly to fans having a positive experience. We see some similar things on the team side of the ledger here. Fan focus and other entertainment. These factors, people said, I don't think those are very important, but what we actually found is that they correlated strongly. Again, on the flip side, on the bottom of the table here, cost factors, ticket cost, parking, concession, these are things that people say are important generally, but what we actually found is these things do not correlate strongly to having a positive fan experience. So again, it goes back to this idea of the sunk cost, and people understand it might be an expensive thing to go to the game, but at that point they've made the investment, and if they have a really positive or negative experience, that's what they remember from other factors, not necessarily from what they paid. And looking at these team factors, I think about Disney World as an example. I have a 9-month-old son. I'm like already saving up for 5 years down the line when he might want to go to Disney World because it's not cheap to do. But what they really do well is they focus on their customers. They have great entertainment. Customer service is excellent. And so people leave Disney World having had a great experience. And even though it was expensive, they're not so much thinking about the cost that they paid. And they're thinking, I'm willing to save up, or I'm willing to invest in that experience again. And that's why people continue to go back to Disney World. And the same thing can be true for a team or a venue. If you're investing in making sure that when your fans are in the arena, that their expectations are exceeded, they're having a great time, regardless of the team performance on the field, they'll be more likely to return, regardless of the cost. Looking now sort of across different types of venues, so we have stadiums, arenas, and racetracks that we looked at. Some of the patterns for actual importance are consistent or similar across the board, but there are a few interesting differences. One that I wanted to call out here was technology. We see technology rated fairly high for racetracks, for race fans, which is a little bit counterintuitive. We know from some other secondary research that race fans are typically later adopters to technology, not as heavy users. So it was a bit of a surprise to see that technology in the venue correlated pretty strongly to fan experience. But racing is a high-tech sport. There's a lot of technology involved with it. There's a lot of data, created through that. And so if, as a venue, you think about, okay, how can I make this information more readily available in real time to my fans? That might be an investment worth making and something that they really moves the needle on their fan experience more so than some other areas that might have jumped off the page first that you thought you should invest in. So depending on what type of venue you are, the differences also are there. Yeah, question? Yeah, sorry. The leftmost is the stadiums, and the middle is the arenas. So yeah. So now looking across leagues, what's actually most important to fans of each of these leagues that we looked at? One thing that I wanted to point out here was atmosphere. So this is something people stated. The atmosphere of the game is important to me, and it's something that bore out to be pretty true across the traditional major sports in the U.S. Football, baseball, basketball, hockey. One or two for all of those in atmosphere for actual importance. But what we saw for MLS or WNBA, maybe a little bit more to differing degrees, niche sports or emerging sports, newer leagues, we found that atmosphere wasn't as important a driving factor in, or at least a correlating factor in positive fan experience. Yeah, so we sort of left that open to the interpretation of the respondents. But generally the fan excitement, just the buzz you feel in the stadium, that sort of the overall feel you get when you're attending. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you're maybe in the MLS or working in the WNBA, it might not be smart to try to force atmosphere or invest in something that maybe is conjured up to create a better atmosphere, if that's not something that's really a top driver for your league or your team. And so maybe focusing in another area, you see customer service as a strong for MLS or WNBA. No, they were left to interpretation. Or customers, attention to fans paid by staff, helpfulness of stadium staff. Could have been games that are played that are focused on the fans during play. So yeah, it was left to interpretation. There could be some overlap, certainly for fan-focused customer service and maybe other entertainment. There might be some confusion there, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So to me, I feel like when I look at these things, I feel the whole thing's built into interpretation. So it's really not giving me any kind of actual.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In some of them, there could be overlap in interpretation. So, to your point about atmosphere,
And if you went back, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you went back when it said venue versus
Yeah, ultimately those things are likely a partnership between the team and venue. And in many of these cases, the team or the team owner owns the venue as well. In some cases, they didn't. So, in some of these, we had to make a decision as to which we felt in more cases or not it fell under, which had the most influence. So, customer service, certainly in some cases, is more of a venue issue. In a lot of cases, that's an issue heavily influenced by the team. And so we just felt in more instances it was covered by the team. But there were some areas where we had to make decisions about which we felt fell under which sides. Yeah, it's a good question. So just looking sort of at the leagues and across the leagues, the point to be made is that not everything is equal, of course. Each league, each team, each area, you want to look at what is consistently driving or correlating with fan experience with your specific space that you're playing in order to make those decisions. Also now cutting a layer deeper, looking at different demographic groups. Hispanic here used as an example. Clearly a growing demographic group, an important group in a lot of industries, and in sports as well. And one thing that we found is that Hispanic fans really are drawn to players, and players is something that highly correlates with whether they have a good time at their game or not. So if you're trying to attract Hispanic fans, or if you're in a Hispanic market, anything you can do to maybe tell stories around those players, or if you have Hispanic players on your roster, things to emphasize those. That's one area that's limited investment, but can really improve the fan experience of a Hispanic fan. So we're able to, as we're working with teams and working through this data, cut it by different groups based on what their target markets are, and we can identify what are the areas of low-hanging fruit that they can target most effectively that group that they want to reach. So then now going beyond the stated versus the actual fan experiences, we also wanted to see how do people that attend sporting events differ from non-attendees. And one way that we did this was we looked at people that had been attending games, and then we also looked at a group of non-attendees that were a lookalike group to that group, and these are people that we feel should be attending games. So these were 35 to 54-year-old males that self-professed avid sports fans, but that were not attending games. And so when we compared these two groups, the attendees in orange and the non in blue, you see they overlap fairly strongly, but the areas where they don't, as far as what were their favorite aspects of attending a game, were the more social elements of attending a game. So socializing with other fans, pre- and post-game events with friends, the attendees really valued these more. We saw this more pronounced when we looked at leagues specifically. So for the NFL, attendees were 18 percentage points more likely than non-attendees to say that socializing with their friends was an important or their favorite aspect of attending. MLS, similar thing, attendees 27 percentage points more likely than non-attendees to say pre- and post-event game events are their favorite aspect of attending. So certainly social elements are organic and part of the attendance and going to a live sporting event, but there are ways that you can enhance that, and this is something that fans really appreciate, and those that attend, we find, prefer that to non-attendees. So if you enhance that, their experience will be improved. Similarly, if you are able to communicate to those non-fans maybe what they're missing out in the social element, that might appeal to some of them, and maybe you'll be able to convert some of those to be attendees as well. And then also looking on the issue of attendance, really if we're looking between, sorry, my clicker is, if you're looking between attendees and non-attendees, really we find that income is a driver. Unfortunately, we see that as sports are becoming more and more expensive to attend, we see the highest levels of the income groups are most likely to be those that attended across just about every sport. And so it's a difficult pattern that's emerging in sports as we want to increase attendance is that it's less and less affordable. Whoops. So we see, overall household composition, only 23% of households fall into that 100,000 plus bucket. And so as sports become more and more expensive, fewer and fewer people will be able to afford it, and it may just become a luxury item for the wealthy or affluent, which is a challenge for an industry like sports, which is supposed to appeal to a wide range of audiences. And if those people can't attend games, they might be less likely to become fans in the long run. So this could probably be an entire study and a session on its own, but I think it's a challenge that's worth bringing up and an important one for teams and venues to explore. So then I'll just do a quick case study for how we hope venues and how we help venues use this information. So using Fenway Park as an example. So overall, Fenway, when looking against Major League Baseball as a whole, slightly above average, doing fairly well. And when we compare against a peer group of sort of large market, traditional, iconic franchises, we see that Fenway is a little above average. We also see Fenway when looking here on the right-hand side at Boston. They are slightly, they're in that higher tier. There's sort of a higher tier and a lower tier that emerges in Boston. So overall, doing all right. But there are specific areas where they could improve. So looking here, just plotting how their performance is on the y-axis and the importance of that factor along the x. These are the benchmarks for Major League Baseball of all these types of venue factors. And when we average those, we kind of get 4 quadrants. So on the left-hand side, these are less important, and the performance along the y. Right-hand side, more important. And so when we look at Fenway's scores, we saw sort of 3 different groups emerging. First were those that they were doing pretty good on, right around the league average. Nothing to really celebrate, but nothing to be too concerned about, and maybe not major investment priorities now. So food and beverage, scoreboard, security. They're doing pretty well on these, maybe not top priorities. The next group were things that they were underperforming in, but things that were really out of their control. Parking, ease of getting to the stadium, and view. They're not going to move the stadium. They can't control the traffic. I don't think people are going to be tearing down any walls in Fenway to improve sight lines. So these are, underperformance, but really out of their control. So then we looked at what could they control and what could they improve. Circulation is one area where fans indicated that Fenway was falling below. So anything they can do to improve the concourses, add more staff, more wayfinding signage, to help people get to where they're going and improve circulation. That's one area where they could do some little investments to really improve fan experience, and something that really is pretty important to fans. Technology, another area where they fall behind, and Boston, fairly tech-savvy city, seems to be something that they could work to improve, and that would really move the needle on fan experience. And then perhaps the most jarring, restroom cleanliness and quality. Fenway did not perform well, and that's something pretty easy with some investment that they could improve, and is important to fans. Just clean your bathrooms a bit better. So when we work with teams and venues looking through this data, we try to pull out these areas. What can you control, and what's important to fans? One other interesting point here: if we average out all these factors, they come to about a 37%. If you recall from the previous slide, Fenway's overall score was 70. So there's a little cognitive dissonance going on among fans that, looking at all the factors, they're only like a 3.7 out of 10. But yeah, I had a good time. So that's the power of live sports, the power of going to the game. And then finally, just a quick look at what are some of the top performing venues and teams that we saw. AT&T Park, not necessarily the newest stadium, but I've toured it a few times. They do a great job of staying on the cutting edge of everything. They're a top performing venue. So we see Consol Energy Center here in town, or sorry, XL Energy Center here in town, performed pretty well. So overall, pretty strong group of teams and venues. Just wanted to call out these 3 with the Blackhawks, AT&T, and Safeco. These are about 10 or 15 years old. These aren't the newest venues. The other ones are all quite new, but they've done a really strong job of staying on top of trends, and they didn't maybe benefit from all the data and information that we have these days in building venues, but still score really highly. So with that, I think we're close to time, but if we have time for a question or two, be happy to take those. Sure, yeah, and feel free to find me at lunch as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I mean, price is one of the main things that came up throughout, because stated importance is important. That's really when I'm making a decision if I'm going to go or not, that's what I'm thinking about. And so those are hurdles, of course, price and can I get to the stadium. But the way the economics of sports are right now, teams aren't really lowering their prices these days. And I think that'd be a whole other exploration of how that mix can change to become more affordable. But if you can't change your prices, you need to make sure that you're giving the top experience and exceeding expectations, because those prices have been trending up for a long time. And that is something that is a hurdle for attendance initially when you're making that purchase decision. When you look back on it, you kind of don't think about it as if I had a good time or not. But yeah, I think that just emphasizes the need to make that experience as positive as possible. Yeah, I mean, I think there are pricing models and things that they have, so they'd be able to see the sensitivity of those adjustments, which this research doesn't touch on specifically. So I think I would be hesitant to encourage that straight away. Yeah. So. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That wasn't one of the 18 factors we evaluated. But I think that would be interesting if we start to cut looking at different demographic groups and seeing, which venues they seek, and those that identify from other research as maybe more patriotic type demographic groups, and seeing how those trend. It'd be an interesting way to look. It wasn't something that we had investigated in this study. Well, yeah, and it's a great point that you made about how all these are tied together. I mean, you just talked about price and concessions. Am I bringing where is it located? Am I a family of four, or am I a single person? So all these things work, together, and it's not, they all influence one another. So it's not a single thing. I think we had a question in the back. Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 Yeah, it would be, I think, great to look at how these factors, when people make changes, do they tweak how we think they would, or do they move the needle how we think they would? Mm-hmm.
How often are these studies mimicked with all these different factors, just as trends are changing?
Yeah.
And keep teams updated on?
Yeah, so we ran the first fielding of the study last year, and I think we're sort of now evaluating the response to see if we're gonna make the investment to conduct it annually, or if it's going to be a one-off. That's a good question.
These are such great questions. Please feel free to find Jordan at lunch, but I want to make sure that you guys get